Chapter 11, Part 2. Male Chauvinism. Behavioral Peculiarities. A. Early behavioral preferences. Studies indicate that even babies aged 9 to 17 months, an age when they are unlikely to grasp the concept of male and female distinctions, show a preference for toys stereotypically associated with their gender. Moreover, differences between the sexes are evident even when measured using implicit tests. These tests bypass conscious decision-making, suggesting that the observed behaviors are not merely the result of societal stereotypes but may stem from innate predispositions. This idea is further supported by research on non-human primates. Female monkeys were observed to interact with dolls in a manner resembling maternal behavior, while male monkeys showed little interest in such objects. Instead, male monkeys gravitated toward unfamiliar objects, treating them as tools or examining their details, behaviors rarely exhibited by females. These findings raise the question, are such behavioral differences rooted in intrinsic brain structures, or they evolved for a specific purpose? While the debate continues, the consistency of these patterns across species suggests that these differences may serve a functional role, likely tied to survival and reproduction. B. Spatial orientation. Research conducted at the University of Chicago highlights that males across a range of animal species outperform females in spatial orientation tasks. This finding undermines the long-standing hypothesis that such differences stem purely from human evolutionary roles, such as men being hunters and women gatherers. Since similar differences are evident in species with no such occupational distinctions, researchers suggest hormonal factors may play a pivotal role in shaping these abilities. The primary law of quantitative trait genetics asserts that traits influenced by natural selection tend to be inherited by both sexes unless they are demonstrably harmful to the female organism. This caveat does not appear to apply to the discussed traits, allowing for their transmission across generations. However, greater variability in female brain morphology might carry risks for population stability, including the potential for deviations. Traits that reduce interest in offspring or decrease attractiveness to the opposite sex could also be disadvantageous. Male individuals influenced by instinct and biological markers associated with reproductive health are more likely to show interest in female behaviors that signal nurturing and care for offspring. These traits likely serve as evolutionary signals, ensuring reproductive success and the continued survival of the species. C. Emotions. The hypothalamus and pituitary gland, two essential components of the endocrine system, function differently in men and women, despite their close interconnection. These intersexual differences affect the activity of the hypothalamic pituitary axis, which regulates cortisol secretion in the adrenal glands. In women, cortisol levels typically peak in response to social stress, while in men, they rise during motivational stress, particularly in problem-solving scenarios. The female body also exhibits a distinct physiological reaction to stress compared to the male body. Women release higher levels of stress hormones into the bloodstream, a response influenced by progesterone. This heightened alarm system likely evolved to protect not only their own lives, but also the lives of their offspring, enabling rapid responses to potential threats. Men, on the other hand, often respond more directly to immediate danger, or in some cases, only after the danger has packed up and left. Women's intrinsic social orientation, critical for nurturing children and fostering relationships, also makes them more prone to ruminating over unpleasant situations and negative emotions. These tendencies often revolve around relationships, whether with close family members or colleagues. D. Differences in perception of information. In conversation, men often focus on extracting the essence, while women tend to seek details in the overall atmosphere of the narrative. Women want to feel the story, processing information with both hemispheres of the brain. This often leaves them puzzled by a man's apparent indifference to nuances they consider vital. This distinction is also evident in broader interests. Men are generally drawn to mechanics and the physical functionality of phenomena, while women are captivated by the details and the manner in which processes unfold. For example, in a student laboratory observing bacteria, boys and girls might offer different observations. How chaotically it moves. What is it eating? It's so transparent. It bends its tail to turn around. One can easily guess which remarks are more often made by whom. However, this does not imply that gender-specific brain focuses, shaped by evolutionary necessity, are incapable of noticing what the opposite sex notices. If an individual sets their mind to a task, their brain will adapt to perform it, thanks to the brain's remarkable plasticity. The difference lies merely in the genetic predispositions of the sexes. There is no such thing as a better or worse brain. Each develops distinct qualities suited to specific challenges and contexts, shaped by differing biological and environmental influences. While these qualities may align with general tendencies, significant overlaps in capabilities exist, and much depends on individual variations. Ultimately, these observations are grounded in patterns rather than rigid rules. Ideological evolution. Imagine for a moment that we collectively begin denying the physical differences between the sexes, even those that are plainly observable and easily testable, such as the general physical strength of males. Then again, perhaps we don't need to imagine it. We're already at the stage where suppressing testosterone in a fully developed male body is deemed sufficient to erase such distinctions. Fine, let's consider something more unequivocal. Men don't give birth. But no, scratch that. It seems even this is no longer an irrefutable truth. What else then? No, let's steer clear of the bathroom debate, and we'd best avoid questioning the premise that children should lack full autonomy over their bodies until adulthood. After all, these too are increasingly sensitive topics. Frankly, I'm at a loss. What remains is an example of absurd denial of obvious differences. Ah, yes, the chromosomal distinction between XX and XY. Yet even here, I recently watched a science communicator diminish its significance, proclaiming it trivial and infinitely malleable. As if to underline his point, he sketched a little tail onto the Y chromosome on a whiteboard, effortlessly transforming it into an X. The crowd erupted into applause and shouts of "Bravo!" Perhaps it was meant as humor, but who's to say this imagery won't one day be presented as evidence of some invisible processes justifying the abolition of even the terms man and woman? At this rate, we might all find ourselves categorized not by our sex or biology, but as fresh body, not so fresh body, little body, and freshly departed body. In this hypothetical future, physiological and biological realities will be dismissed entirely, an inconvenient relic of the past. Hypothetically, such a reality might arise under the rule of a totalitarian global consensus, where scientists, fearing the loss of funding or social standing, feel compelled to legitimize these ideas for the masses. In such a scenario, how many of us would dare to say, "No, I see the difference between these categories of bodies"? Far more likely, we'd rush to denounce the prejudices and discriminations of earlier generations. Perhaps some of us would even compete for positions as scientific popularizers, eagerly promoting the dominant ideology or, more plainly, the new orthodoxy of the time. Values are a social construct shaped by the desires of the majority, or at least presented as such. Even science, often held up as the pinnacle of objectivity, is not immune to these social dynamics. It exhibits a remarkable interpretational flexibility, operating within a relatively narrow scope determined by prevailing societal principles. While it's unlikely we will ever fully uncover the extent of this phenomenon, it is widely understood that if creationists were to gain control over the establishment of ethical norms and the verification of scientific data, bias and deliberate misinformation would inevitably ensue. After all, we instinctively understand that humans are inherently biased creatures, unconsciously driven to elevate their worldview above others. The evolutionary roots of this pathological inclination toward bias, a defining feature of our species, will be explored in detail in a later chapter. Summarizing evolutionary differences. Many wonder why evolution shaped us the way it did. Why do boys struggle to focus in school? Why do girls often lose in pillow fights, perhaps because they were simply never meant to win? How did we end up with such striking differences? The answer likely lies in the distinct roles men and women historically played in survival and reproduction. A woman's primary task revolved around raising offspring, sharing food, ensuring the child actually ate it, and intuiting the child's desires by recognizing emotional cues. This required high sensitivity and emotional acuity, aligning external signals with internal instincts. To ensure survival, women needed to transfer large amounts of information about dangers and strategies for survival. It is even plausible that early language was tactile, perhaps explaining why women tend to have thinner skin and other features conducive to touch. The demand for precise and effective information transfer likely pushed women to refine language, incorporating more complex sounds and visual elements. One can imagine early women initiating conversations about daily life, perhaps asking their male counterparts, "How was work?" When the tired man responded with gestures and incoherent grunts, she might have handed him a stick and said, "Draw." While this act was likely intended to pass information to their child, her finely tuned limbic system meant her interest was genuine, creating a rich culture of communication. Over time, this contributed to women excelling in reading, writing, and interpersonal dialogue. At the same time, men inherited their frontal lobes as a bonus from women's evolutionary drive to ensure the survival of their offspring. In men, this function became something of a vestigial feature, reflecting the same caregiving instincts, but directed toward a broader scope, from their wife and child to the wider collective. It also took on the critical role of adapting the environment to meet the conditions necessary for survival. This required accounting for and calculating numerous factors. From this need for event calculation, mathematics was born, and from long-term observation of processes to deduce their functions and practical applications, physics emerged, ultimately leading to innovations and inventions. All this new information was primarily passed down to children by women, as men engaged in child-rearing far less frequently, to put it mildly. Due to the success of this vestigial area, a feature originating from the female brain that found a new function in the male brain, its traits became ingrained as a unique sexual characteristic, passed down through generations. This evolutionary addition enriched each sex with new qualities while preserving the critical predispositions of both genders necessary for the effective survival of the species. If the roots of differences are not so ancient. If we consider a theistic explanation for the emergence of differences between the sexes, it could be attributed to God's foresight of humanity's eventual deviation from the natural order of life. This deviation plunged humanity into entropy in all forms and spheres, including self-destruction and the destruction of others. One of the factors designed not only to restrain mutual annihilation but also to correct consciousness was the polarity of the sexes. This interdependence would foster a shared perspective in human consciousness toward others and, by extension, toward all of creation. The stronger this sense of reciprocity, the greater the likelihood of mutual care. It's observable how adolescents, after experiencing profound feelings of love, often reevaluate their attitudes toward many things and, in essence, transform into different people. Modern ideology, however, seeks to adjust these chemical factors with a psychosomatic mindset, promoting the notion that, since these feelings are merely the result of chemical processes, they should not exert any significant cognitive influence on you beyond fulfilling a basic need. Such messaging undoubtedly tempers the original pedagogical effect of these chemical processes, but the result is inferior to the default cognitive mechanism, one free from informational determinism. These differences could be seen as a hint at perfection in symbiosis, where the focus shifts from the self to the other. An orientation that fosters life and, in our case, progress and the advancement of civilization. Of course, no one disputes the uniqueness of the sexes, their preferences, and their abilities. What people object to is the notion of one sex being inherently superior to the other, or the imposition of restrictions on who one can be or what one can do based solely on gender. As finite mortals, we strive to overcome stereotypes and challenge the principles of efficiency wherever possible, not merely in theory but through genuine demonstrations of equality in practice. Even if our efforts fall short and lead to outcomes reminiscent of the Norwegian scenario, where, despite achieving social, legal, and informational equality, along with fostering a non-discriminatory mindset, gendered career tendencies remain distinct, we can take solace in having tried. In Norway, without the reverse coercion or psychological pressure seen in other countries, Women often gravitate toward professions centered on interpersonal interaction, while men tend toward engineering, analytical, or physically demanding fields. Such results do not diminish the value of our efforts. They underscore our willingness to confront blind evolution and defy its patterns, even if doing so feels like thrusting a lance into the windmills of natural laws. There are no questions for evolution. It simply is. But if these physiological differences are the work of God, and He not only created inequality as an artificial obstacle to train our will toward justice, but instead prescribed hierarchy as a normative principle to be accepted rather than challenged, then a troubling question arises. Does God value justice less than we do, or does He lack it altogether? Yet it is evident that God upholds the principle of equality, envisioning an ultimate state where sexual differences cease to exist, reflecting the perfect equality inherent in His own nature. The only remaining distinction will be humanity's perpetual dependence on the source of life. True happiness will be found in aligning with the laws of this life, which ultimately embody the character of God. According to the Bible, the fall occurred because humanity rejected dependence, rebelling against the laws of happiness, and striving for superiority by activating dormant, abstract potential, an act that introduced entropy into life and resulted in suffering. At the root of all negativity lies the antinomic pursuit of dominance for its own sake, a concept fundamentally different from necessary and benevolent dominance. The latter serves a constructive purpose where an individual willingly relinquishes authority when alternatives exist or when their leadership is no longer needed. Since God is the source of life itself, creating anything truly independent of Him would logically lead to its transition into non-existence. Similarly, humans may relinquish dominance when it benefits the greater good, but must retain it where its absence would cause objective harm or amplify entropy. In this way, humanity reflects the character of God, mirroring His balance between authority and self-restraint. The hierarchical concept, then, can be understood as a form of pedagogy aimed at addressing the root of humanity's sin, the desire for dominance purely for the sake of feeling superior, or, in biblical terms, pride. Its purpose is to teach humanity to find joy in accepting goodness and embracing dependence on a loving relationship, rather than striving for superiority, which inevitably leads to division and death. Given that everything God created carries an illustrative and pedagogical purpose, it is reasonable to infer that, at the moment of human creation, God foresaw future events. He embedded within humanity the tools necessary to admonish and correct this rebellious inclination, specifically the blind thirst for dominance. At first glance, it might seem that the ultimate remedy for dominance would be absolute equality, erasing all differences that could lead to pride or abuse of one's unique role. In such a hypothetical world, no one would endure the humbling experience of dependence and need known as childhood. Instead, individuals would be born fully mature and independent, stepping directly into adulthood as equals. Old age would vanish, replaced by an abrupt, painless death at 45. In this society, all distinctions, whether of age, race, sex, biological traits, or even acquired characteristics like disabilities or economic disparity, would cease to exist, removing any basis for unequal opportunities. However, this vision collapses under the weight of its own contradictions. The persistence of hierarchical structures can be attributed to several key factors, as outlined below. 1. Free will and the consequence of sin. Free will, with its inherent potential for arbitrariness, including the pursuit of dominance for the sake of dominance, requires conditions that allow it to persist. It cannot be extinguished by an ideal state of absolute equality without undermining its very essence. In this context, biological differentiation can be understood as a direct consequence of sin, serving as a necessary framework for the exercise of free will in an imperfect world. Yet, does the Bible not state that God created humans with biological differences and the capacity for childbirth even before the fall? As previously noted, God anticipated every nuance, foreseeing all possible scenarios. It is reasonable to surmise that biological uniqueness, originally designed to highlight the interdependence of individuals, did not involve fundamental inequalities before the curse that subjected women to dependence on men. This curse should not be understood as the creation of suffering, but rather as a pedagogical tool, a rehabilitative therapy akin to training damaged tissues in a paralyzed body. Similarly, the curse upon the earth, which brought toil and decay, reflects the suspension of unchanging laws to accommodate rebellious will. While these conditions are undesirable, they are the best means of offering humanity the chance for transformation and eventual restoration to perfection, rather than outright annihilation. The Bible also reflects hierarchical roles within God Himself, mirroring the human hierarchy as an edifying illustration during the period of sin in the universe, a topic explored further in the chapter on the Trinity. This temporary hierarchy serves as a lesson in interdependence and humility, until the conditions for perfect equality can be fully realized. The Lord said to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool." Matt 22:44. For he must reign until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed is death. 1 Corinthians 15:25-26. Likewise, the Bible promises eventual equality for humanity. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. Gal 3:28. Once humanity achieves complete harmony with the laws of life, the need for hierarchical structures as a pedagogical tool will disappear. The only remaining distinction will be the direct presence of God in human existence, providing a more tangible and intimate form of communication. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. Rev. 21:3. Free will, however, will remain intact, as its preservation is essential to the nature of love and the highest good. The right to choose an alternative will exist, though accompanied by an enduring memory of the consequences. His brightness was like the light. He had rays flashing from his hand, and there his power was hidden. Habakkuk 3:4. Nevertheless, the Bible assures that the fall will not happen again. Nothing impure will ever enter it, nor will anyone who does what is shameful or deceitful, but only those whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life. Rev. 21:27. Humanity will have internalized the tragedy of sin and come to understand the cost of love, ensuring the permanence of harmony and unity. 2. Absolute equality and divine reality. Absolute equality, as opposed to hierarchy, may not fully capture the essence of divine reality, where the superiority of infinity over all dependent beings remains an intrinsic truth. The numerous factors upon which humans rely, air, water, the 118+ chemical elements, and the laws governing their interactions, serve as constant reminders of humanity's dependence on something greater. These dependencies are not just illustrations of our limitations, but also a means of grounding us in the reality of interdependence. Even in eternity, there would remain a substance personifying our existence in God, sustained and created by God Himself. 3. Hierarchy as illustration and mechanism. Hierarchy can serve not only as a training ground for dependence on something infinitely greater, but also, in the context of a distorted reality, as a mechanism of distinction for the will's inclinations. It allows individuals to pursue their subjective happiness through differing attitudes toward their circumstances and objective reality. For instance, personal dominance can be perceived either as a source of pleasure and privilege or as a means of care and responsibility. A refusal to accept objective reality may also manifest in willingly submitting to another's dominance, despite possessing one's own advantages and abilities. This might arise from a desire to avoid personal responsibility, physical or intellectual challenges, or as a concession to ideological conformity, shifting responsibility for the sake of statistical or demonstrative balance in favor of one's worldview, regardless of the cost, inefficiency, or the cumulative increase in humanity's suffering. Conversely, agreement with objective reality involves recognizing oneself or another in a dominant role to maximize efficiency and minimize harm. Yet, even if such a system is just and effective, one might still ask, why did the burden of weaker physical parameters fall upon women? According to the Bible, this was a matter of circumstance. God had to assign the pedagogical burden to someone, and the coin toss of circumstance fell upon women as part of this illustrative system. However, in reality, no one truly escapes this dynamic. All humans inevitably pass through the stage of childhood, a period that reinforces dependence on others and instills humility. It would also be incorrect to claim that men, upon reaching maturity, are uniquely fortunate to escape subordination. On the contrary, men encounter hierarchical structures within society where a handful of individuals, rulers, presidents, and other leaders may appear to stand alone, free from the correcting factor of submission and accountability. Yet, this is far from the truth. Leadership, when properly understood, vividly illustrates the reverse process. Those in power, occupying the humble position of a servant, bear responsibility for the care and well-being of those who have entrusted themselves to their authority. Those who possess greater opportunities and advantages have a moral obligation to use them for the benefit of those with fewer resources or less control, whether due to physical, biological, or circumstantial limitations. This principle resonates with our instinct to protect and sympathize with women, the elderly, children, and individuals with disabilities during times of conflict or crisis. Society can be viewed through the lens of a family, where a principle of circular accountability governs relationships. Children obey their parents, but this is contingent upon parents acting in their children's best interests and being prepared to sacrifice their own lives, if necessary, for their protection. Similarly, a healthy marriage thrives when spouses prioritize the common good, pooling their resources, particularly intellectual ones, to achieve shared goals. Every member, whether in the microcosm of the family or the macrocosm of society, must actively participate to ensure collective well-being. Yet, situations of deadlock are inevitable, where neither side's arguments clearly outweigh the other's. In such cases, a formal arbiter is necessary, whether a president in a state or a head of household, whose role is not to possess superior wisdom, but to maintain functionality by tipping the balance and avoiding stagnation. In a family, this might mean a wife deferring to her husband's decision to preserve his motivation for external challenges, or a husband conceding to his wife's preferences, unless doing so would cause greater harm to the family. In all other cases, the husband should prioritize his wife's emotional comfort and support her happiness. Similarly, a state must consider individual needs unless those needs pose a threat to societal stability. Balancing individual desires with collective harmony is the cornerstone of a healthy society. When a spouse unilaterally makes decisions, or when a leader ignores the voice of their parliament or people, the result devolves into tyranny. Such individuals misunderstand the essence of their roles, mistaking leadership for dominance rather than stewardship. On the other extreme lies the utopian notion that society, whether a family or a nation, can function without leaders or hierarchies. However, historical and social analyses confirm that such models are inevitably destined for collapse regardless of scale. It is worth noting that, according to the Bible, God did not originally plan for kings or presidents to wield such extensive control. Instead, he required respect for elders, establishing something akin to a council of elders, periodically reinforced by prophets and judges to correct the course when necessary. These structures operated alongside the priesthood, which fulfilled distinct societal and spiritual roles. But what happens when hierarchy and decision-making fail within the smaller social unit of marriage? Suppose you live in a society where spouses are chosen for you, and over a mere handshake, you find yourself married to someone whose character or intellect falls far below your expectations. Or perhaps worse, you live in a country where marriages are often rushed due to physiological impulses or pregnancy, only to discover that your partner's silence and constant smile were not signs of wisdom, but indicators of something far less promising. Is the principle of hierarchy still relevant in such a scenario? The Bible offers an illuminating example. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was clever and beautiful, but the man was surly and mean. 1 Samuel 25:3. Reading this story, it becomes evident that the Bible celebrates Abigail's wisdom in managing Nabal's household and repeatedly saving him from calamity. Their marriage ended when Nabal suffered a heart attack, freeing Abigail to form a more harmonious union with David. Remarkably, Abigail used her intelligence to counsel David, whose decisions consistently aligned with her advice. The story, despite its tragic nature, demonstrates that even in an uneven marriage, a wise spouse can guide their partner toward better decisions and manage the household by encouraging them to make the right choices, or, at times, making them in their place, without resorting to impeachment. If the goal is to preserve the family, this approach is far more prudent than extinguishing the last vestiges of a partner's ability to contribute to the household. That said, it is far better to avoid entering such a union or partnership altogether under the circumstances described earlier. Instead, one might be better served by trusting the natural instinct observable in the behavior of many women, who are often drawn to confident leaders focused not on the opposite sex, but on achieving their own goals. Such individuals demonstrate their care through meaningful actions rather than empty words, which helps explain the particular delight women often feel when receiving thoughtful gifts. The Bible also offers clear guidance on rejecting tyrannical authority and supports leaving any union that violates God's principles. Consequently, God does not prescribe inequality, but rather establishes a functional model designed to prevent greater harm in its absence. But what about the Bible's prohibition of female leadership in the church? I do not permit a woman to teach or to have authority over a man. 1 Tim 2:12. In the broader context, it becomes clear that this is not a blanket prohibition against women teaching or actively participating in the church. Commands to appoint women as deacons and to instruct youth in the congregation affirm their vital role. Instead, this reflects a universal principle. Someone must make the final decision when there is no clear consensus. The debate, then, is not about the validity of the model itself, but why men are given symbolic authority in these situations. This aligns with the previously discussed system, which prioritizes functionality over perceived fairness. This system in the church offers a certain grace to women, sparing them from the heavy burden of making stressful, life-altering decisions. Even in cases where women pastors lead congregations, as a Pentecostal pastor I know observed, it is common practice to pair them with male elders. Over time, this practice emerged from an observed tendency. Women were often found to gravitate toward the perspectives of confident men in the congregation, opinions that sometimes diverged from denominational norms. Biological and psychological factors further underscore this distinction. Women generally find it more challenging to endure prolonged psychological strain. While they can rise to such challenges out of principle, it would be profoundly unfair to impose such burdens on them, no less unfair than encouraging women to take on physically demanding or rough jobs. The issue is not about standing at a pulpit. Such tasks involve minimal psychological strain and are not prohibited by the Bible. Rather, it concerns bearing the weight of decisions with profound and far-reaching consequences, where even minor hormonal fluctuations could potentially influence critical judgments or fatal decisions. Perhaps this explains why field generals, particularly those responsible for devising large-scale combat strategies and bearing direct responsibility for military outcomes, are virtually non-existent throughout history. While women have served with distinction in various military roles, including leadership, their presence in such highly strategic and historically male-dominated positions amounts to no more than the role of Joan of Arc. While she inspired and led troops during the 100 Years' War, her role was more symbolic and inspirational rather than one of strategic planning at the field general level. And even if someone were to venture to look for women to fill such a stressful position, they would find very few volunteers. Of course, we could attempt to artificially rewire women's neuroplasticity, training brain regions to adopt qualities that erode natural differences and diminish the complementary attraction between the sexes. Alternatively, we could flood women with testosterone, encouraging them to prioritize work-related thoughts, even in their sleep, over children and social connections, and celebrate the fleeting triumph of equality for exactly one generation. But would this truly be progress or merely a temporary, costly illusion of fairness? Conclusion. 1. Attempts to eliminate all recognition of gender differences risk undermining both family dynamics and broader social interaction. Healthcare and medicine. Ignoring biological and physiological distinctions could result in misdiagnoses and inappropriate treatments. Men and women often respond differently to medications, therapies, and preventive measures, including those for sex-specific diseases. Physical standards and safety. Unified physical requirements in sports, the military, or physically demanding industries could expose women to a higher risk of injury due to average differences in muscle mass, strength, and endurance. Similarly, workplace ergonomics must consider the physiological needs of both sexes to ensure safety and productivity. Sports competition. Equalizing and enforcing a single physical standard across all sports categories risks disadvantaging female athletes, placing them in an unfair position despite their rigorous training and skill. Such an approach not only diminishes their accomplishments but threatens to erode the dignity and purpose of women's competition altogether. Similarly, allowing adult athletes with medical confirmation of mental health conditions, equating their development to that of children, could undermine the motivation and progress of youth sports. Mental health and stress management. Men and women experience stress and psychological challenges differently. Uniform approaches to workplace support or healthcare can overlook these distinctions, exacerbating mental health issues. Women, who often carry a higher psychological burden in professional settings, particularly benefit from tailored legislation addressing holidays, flexible schedules, and other supportive measures. Education and career outcomes. Gender differences in academic performance and career preferences should be acknowledged without artificial attempts to equalize representation across all professions. Forcing parity can lead to economic inefficiency, stifle individual excellence, and discourage people from pursuing their natural aptitudes. Legal and societal fairness. Uniform laws that disregard gender-specific differences may inadvertently cause injustice. For example, inheritance rights, family law, workplace protections, and policies addressing violence require nuanced approaches to ensure fairness for both sexes. Efforts to impose uniformity in the name of equality must carefully balance fairness, individuality, and societal efficiency. Recognizing and addressing these distinctions does not undermine equality. It ensures equality is meaningfully and responsibly upheld. 2. The evolutionary roots of gender differences likely stem from the principle of reproductive efficiency. Biological and behavioral traits have evolved to enhance attraction between the sexes, often through patterns that signal care for offspring and the ability to create stable, protective conditions for their upbringing. These traits are not arbitrary, they are integral to the survival and continuation of the species. 3. The purposes behind God's creation of differences could encompass multiple dimensions. A safeguard against societal fragmentation. Differences act as a stabilizing mechanism, encouraging roles and interactions that foster cohesion. An illustration of ideal relationships. Gender distinctions may serve to stimulate and promote the harmony and complementarity originally intended in human interactions. A tool for moral correction. These differences help address the human tendency toward dominance for dominance's sake, nurturing humility, care, and mutual accountability. An adaptation to life's dependent nature. Differences encourage humans to accept their reliance on a higher source of life, fostering interconnectedness and mutual reliance. A reflection of divine uniqueness. Gender distinctions serve as a tangible representation of God's distinctiveness and creative essence. 4. Our differences are not a cause for competition, but an invitation to complementarity. Like a symphony where each instrument contributes its unique sound, every individual plays a vital part. True harmony emerges only when these instruments play together in unison, creating a melody far greater than the sum of its parts.